Welcome to Psyche Talks The Deep Dive, where we take a stack of fascinating insights and distill them into the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. Today, we're plunging into a powerful idea, the art of rethinking. We're exploring why challenging our own assumptions and updating our beliefs is more crucial now than ever.
Right.
And how we can cultivate this vital skill in ourselves and, in others too.
Absolutely. It's really about understanding how fast the world is changing. I mean, unprecedented pace, right?
Yeah.
And our minds, well, they need to keep up. We often cling to old ideas, even when new information is staring us right in the face.
It's true that accelerating pace you mentioned, it forces us to question things we've held on to for a long time.
Yeah,
Think about the global pandemic. That's a really vivid example, isn't it?
definitely.
Many people were just incredibly slow to rethink those initial assumptions, like that the virus wouldn't affect their country, or that it was no deadlier than the flu.
Or that it was only spread by people with obvious symptoms.
Exactly. And the human cost of that slow rethinking. I mean, we're still tallying it up.
We really are. We were all forced, weren't we, to question things we just took for granted. Like, is it safe to go to the hospital? Or eat out, or even hug our parents. And it's fascinating how other events, like the widespread awareness around police brutality, think George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, those terrible events forced millions to rethink their views on racial injustice.
Yeah, a lot of people started to realize, maybe for the first time, that racism isn't just an issue for people of color.
Exactly. And you saw support for the Black Lives Matter movement climb significantly as people reckoned with their own responsibility, to act against prejudice.
And yet, even with these huge shared experiences forcing us to rethink, we still live in a world where, deeply held beliefs can really strain relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
For some people, just mentioning kneeling during the anthem can end a friendship, or how someone voted can end a marriage.
Yeah.
It's intense.
It is. And that inability to rethink, it just fuels polarization.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. If the U.S. Constitution itself allows for amendments, right? What if we were, quicker to make amendments to our own mental constitutions?
That's a great way to put it, because as our beliefs get more entrenched, it becomes harder to update them, even when science gives us new revelations.
Like what?
Well, researchers recently discovered we need to rethink things we thought we knew. Like Cleopatra's roots, turns out her father was Greek, not Egyptian.
Oh.
Or how dinosaurs looked. Paleontologists now think some T-Rexes actually had colorful feathers.
Feathers? Wow.
Yeah, and even something as basic as sight. Blind people have trained themselves to effectively see using sound waves. So these outdated facts, they're like mental fossils. We need to let them go.
Okay, and here's where it connects back to you listening right now. We're often really quick to see when other people need to rethink, aren't we? We question experts all the time, like getting a second medical opinion. But unfortunately, when it comes to our own knowledge, our own opinions, we often we favor feeling right over being right.
That's the crux of it. We need to get into the habit of forming our own second opinions about our own beliefs.
Which brings us to this core idea, embracing the scientist mode of thinking.
Exactly. And what that means is, well, constantly being aware of the limits of your own understanding, doubting what you know a little,
Okay.
being curious about what you don't know, and crucially, updating your views based on new data, new evidence.
And that's really different from how we often operate, right? Like preaching, prosecuting, or politicking.
Totally different. In those modes, we're just looking for reasons why we must be right. Scientist mode is about searching for the truth wherever it leads.
So how do we actually, cultivate this? Is it teachable?
Well, get this, a group of European researchers ran a really bold experiment to find out. They worked with over 100 founders of Italian startups.
Okay, startup founders, what do they do?
So they had this 4-month training program. Half were randomly assigned to a scientific thinking group, the other half to a control group.
And the scientific thinking group.
They were encouraged to view their strategy as just a theory. Customer interviews, that was hypothesis development, their products.
Yeah.
Those were experiments to test the hypotheses.
So very methodical.
Yes, very. Their task was to rigorously measure the results and make decisions based purely on whether their hypotheses held up or not.
Okay, now results.
Pretty striking, actually. Over the next year, the startups in the control group averaged less than $300 in revenue.
Wow, okay, not much.
Not much at all. But the startups in the scientific thinking group, They averaged over $12,000 in revenue.
12,000. That's a huge difference.
Huge. They brought in revenue more than twice as fast, got customers sooner. And the key thing, the control group founders mostly stuck to their original plans. But the scientific thinking group, they pivoted, changed their core business model more than twice as often when the data showed their initial ideas weren't working. They knew when it was time to rethink.
That's fascinating because, we usually celebrate entrepreneurs for being so decisive and certain.
Yeah.
Strong-minded.
I know, right? But the evidence suggests the best strategists are often actually kind of slow and unsure.
Like scientists?
Exactly. Like careful scientists. They take their time so they have that flexibility, that room to change their minds if needed.
So what stops most of us from using this scientist mode more often? You mentioned biases earlier.
Right. The usual suspects. You've probably heard of confirmation bias, seeing what we expect to see, and desirability bias, seeing what we want to see.
Right.
And these biases, they don't just stop us from using our intelligence well, they can actually twist our intelligence into a weapon against the truth. We use our smarts to justify our biases.
Oh, cool.
And then there's another one, the I'm not biased bias.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, where people believe they're more objective than others, and turns out the smarter you are, the more likely you are to fall into this trap.
Really? That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but being good at thinking can actually make you worse at rethinking. You get really good at defending your own position, even if it's flawed.
Wow. Okay, so in scientist mode, changing your mind isn't weakness.
Not at all. It's a sign of intellectual integrity. It's not moral weakness. It's not admitting defeat. It's not flip-flopping.
It's a step towards the truth.
Exactly. And this plays out in leadership, too. Think about U.S. presidents. Experts assess them on personality traits and compared that to rankings by historians.
Okay.
And only one trait consistently predicted presidential greatness.
What was it?
Intellectual curiosity and openness. The great ones read widely, they were genuinely interested in hearing new perspectives, and they revised their old views.
So they saw policies almost like experiments.
Pretty much, like experiments to run, not points to score. They often solved problems like scientists.
That leads perfectly into this idea of, well, the antidote to that overconfidence, right? Intellectual humility, which is basically knowing what you don't know.
Simple as that.
I mean, I can make a long list of things I'm pretty ignorant about. Art, financial markets. Why British singers sound American sometimes when they sing, I have no idea.
Right. And you're touching on the Dunning-Kruger effect there.
Okay, explain that one.
It's basically that ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. The less you know sometimes, the more confident you feel. There's a striking example. David Oddsson, former governor of Iceland's central bank. No training in finance or economics, dismissed experts, even disbanded the National Economic Institute.
Wow.
He seemed, as someone put it, utterly blind to his blindness, just stranded at the summit of Mount Stupid, as Dunning and Kruger called it.
Mount Stupid.
Okay.
And that kind of armchair quarterback certainty, it really gets in the way of rethinking, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If you're certain you know something, why would you look for gaps or flaws in your knowledge?
But the good news is, you mentioned confident humility.
Yes. It's not just about knowing what you don't know, but having confidence in your capacity to learn, not just confidence in what you already know.
And that can be taught.
Seems so. In one experiment, just reading a Scholl article about the benefits of admitting ignorance made students much more likely, like 85% versus 65%, to seek extra help when they needed it.
Interesting.
And other studies show students willing to revise their beliefs get higher grades. Leaders who balance faith and their strengths with knowing their weaknesses, they run the most productive, innovative teams.
We see this play out in the real world too, right? Like that Icelandic presidential candidate, Halldóra.
Íhaldsdóttir, yes. Just a month and a half before the election, she was polling at only 1%. Tiny.
Yeah.
But she didn't have confidence in what she already knew. She had confidence in her ability to learn. And she ended up getting 28% of the vote, came in second.
Amazing. It shows that great thinkers aren't doubting because they feel like imposters.
No, exactly. They maintain doubt because they know we're all partially blind, right? And they're committed to improving their sight. They marvel at how little they understand.
Whereas arrogance just blinds us.
Right. Arrogance blinds, humility is like a reflective lens, and confident humility is the corrective lens we need.
I love that analogy. And it reminds me of Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist. His reaction to being proven wrong is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
He apparently genuinely enjoys it.
Yeah.
Because, he says, it means he's now less wrong than before.
Huh. That's fantastic. The joy of being wrong.
Yeah. But, our inner dictator, as it's sometimes called, often shields us from that, puts us in our filter bubbles and echo chambers.
And when our core beliefs get challenged, it can actually trigger the amygdala, that primitive fight or flight part of the brain.
So we stop thinking like scientists and become
Preachers or prosecutors, trying to convert or condemn the other side. You see this in extreme cases, like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. In a Harvard study years before, he was codenamed Lawful and showed extreme hostility when his views on technology were questioned. He couldn't rethink.
So what's the fix for that internal battle?
A really powerful shift is to try and detach your identity from your beliefs.
Okay, how does that work?
Base your identity on your values instead, like curiosity or learning or integrity. So who you are becomes about what you value, not just what you currently believe. That keeps you more open-minded about the best ways to, live up to those values.
Feels like that Yoda line, right? You must unlearn what you have learned.
Exactly. And it's what those super forecasters do so well. People like Jean-Pierre Bougam, who predicted Trump's win way early, or Kira Morell.
What's her secret?
She basically said, there's no benefit to me for being wrong for longer. She sees opinions as just hunches, things to be tested, and she actively looks for evidence that disconfirms her hunches.
So she's actively trying to prove herself wrong.
In a way, yeah. She said it's actually a good feeling, that sense of discovery and surprise when she realizes she needs to change her mind. She turned the pain of being wrong into a pleasure.
Okay, so if you can get comfortable with being wrong yourself, what about admitting mistakes to other people? That feels like a big hurdle. We worry about our reputation.
It does feel like a big hurdle, but think about the physicist Andrew Wiles.
What happened with him?
Early 90s, he published this huge discovery evidence for a planet orbiting a neutron star. Big deal.
Right.
Months later, he realized, oops, embarrassingly horribly wrong, the planet didn't exist.
Oh no, what did he do?
In front of hundreds of colleagues at a conference, he walked on stage and publicly admitted his mistake. Total confession.
And the reaction?
The room exploded in a standing ovation.
Wow.
Yeah. And research backs this up. Psychologists find that admitting you were wrong doesn't actually make you look less competent. It shows honesty, willingness to learn.
Taking responsibilities, taking your power back. Okay, so that's rethinking ourselves. What about encouraging others to rethink? That often needs an outside push, right?
It often does, and sometimes you need to intentionally build that challenge in, like Brad Bird, the Pixar director.
For The Incredibles.
Yeah. For that movie, he deliberately recruited misfits people, known for being disagreeable, maybe a bit disgruntled or dissatisfied.
Why would he do that?
He wanted to form a challenge network, basically surrounding himself with people who wouldn't just agree, who would question assumptions, offer different views. He knew rethinking depends on having that kind of network. Conflict, used right, becomes a propeller.
Interesting. Okay, so challenge networks help. But what about actually winning debates or, changing someone's mind in conversation? It's not just about hammering them with logic.
No, definitely not. I think you mentioned being called a logic bully.
Huh. Yeah, a former student said that. The more I pushed the arguments, the more she just dug in her heels.
Yeah.
Piling on logic didn't work.
Right. And Harishant Tarajan, a world champion debater, gives us some great insights here. He actually debated an AI.
An AI? Seriously?
Yeah. Project debater from IBM. They called it Deborah Jo Pritt. The topic was government-subsidized preschools.
Okay, so how did Harish win against an AI and human opponents?
Well, first, he always emphasized common ground. Even on a tricky topic like preschool subsidies, he started by saying something like, we disagree on far less than it may seem.
Finding connection first.
Exactly, because, we won't have much luck changing minds if we refuse to change ours even a little. Second, he presented fewer, stronger reasons.
Not like the AI.
No, the AI just piled on study after study like a logic bully, maybe. Harish focused on just two core arguments. He felt too many arguments dilute the power of each one.
Makes sense. Keep it focused.
And third, crucially, he asked genuine questions, lots of them. He'd ask the audience, why is that the case? Or, did it help the most disadvantaged? Not just making statements.
So he lets the listener do the work of persuading themselves.
Precisely. They own the conclusion then. And interestingly, the AI hadn't learned to agree with any part of the opponent's argument.
Why not?
Apparently, because in the 400 million articles it scanned, humans rarely did that.
Huh. That says something about us.
It does. Harish, on the other hand, would steelman his opponent's argument, consider its strongest possible version to genuinely learn from it, rather than just knocking down a straw man.
Steel manning, I like that.
Yeah.
It shows you're not just trying to score points.
Exactly. When you concede someone else made a good point, it signals you're not a preacher or a prosecutor. You're a scientist trying to get to the truth.
Okay, but what about the really tough stuff? Like deep-seated prejudice.
Yeah.
How on earth do you convince someone to abandon hate?
It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? But look at the incredible story of Daryl Davis.
The black musician.
That's him. He's convinced over 200 white supremacists to leave the KKK.
200? How?
His core question, ever since he was a kid experiencing racism, was simple. How can you hate me when you don't even know me? His method wasn't arguing, it was planting a seed of doubt, making them curious about their own beliefs. He tells this story about challenging a KKK exalted cyclops to name black serial killers. The guy couldn't, of course, and Davis gently turned it back on him, showing the absurdity of the stereotype. That guy eventually quit the Klan.
Just making them question their own certainty. Amazing. Let's take a slightly less intense example, but one that shows similar patterns. Sports rivalries.
Ah, yes. The Yankees versus Red Sox kind of hatred.
Exactly. People boo the Yankees even when they're not playing. If you despise a team and its fans that much, you're holding on to some strong stereotypes, and that can easily spill into actual prejudice.
Definitely. And researchers have experimented with ways to disrupt this. One really effective approach was getting fans to reflect on how arbitrary their animosity actually was.
Arbitrary.
Yeah, like reminding Red Sox fans that if they've been born in New York, they'd probably be Yankees fans, and vice versa. Just getting them to see the randomness of it.
And that worked.
It did. It led to more cooperative behavior towards rivals. People started saying things like, yeah, it's pretty dumb to hate someone just based on the sports team they support. It changed views towards the whole group, not just an individual.
That points to the power of interaction, maybe. Getting people to see the other side.
Hugely important. There was a massive meta-analysis over 500 studies, 250,000 people, showing that simply interacting with members of another group reduced prejudice in 94% of cases.
94%, that's staggering.
It really is, and it connects to this technique called motivational interviewing.
From clinical psychology.
Yeah. The focus is on helping people find their own motivation to change, not just preaching at them, like this vaccine whisperer doctor dealing with a hesitant mom.
What did he do?
Instead of lecturing or piling on facts, he just listened. He asked her about her sources, her questions. He showed respect for her perspective, which opened the door for her to maybe rethink.
So it's about listening, really,
Yep.
creating that space. Someone called it inverse charisma.
I like that. Great listeners who make their audience feel smart, helping them discover their own new thoughts. That makes people more open.
And these productive conversations, they're not necessarily less emotional, are they?
No, not at all. They're often more emotionally complex. You embrace a whole range of feelings, maybe some anger, sure, but also curiosity, anxiety, excitement, even that joy of being wrong we talked about, not just getting stuck in angry versus happy.
Like Christian Cooper, the birdwatcher in Central Park. His response to the woman who falsely accused him was so nuanced.
Exactly. Mixed emotions, uncertainty about how to judge her. That complexity is key.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, how do we build this rethinking skill into, say, education for the next generation?
Well, there's a great example from a philosophy professor. He didn't want students just learning from him. He wanted them learning with him. So he'd bring his own half-baked ideas into class.
Show them the process.
Yeah. Let them see what original thinking and philosophy actually looked like, struggles and all.
I can relate to that. When I first started teaching, I struggled with the straight-A students, the perfectionists terrified of being wrong. They wouldn't rethink.
So what did you do?
I had to change how I graded. Reward rethinking, not just spinning back information. I assigned things like mini podcasts, where they had to challenge conventional wisdom or argue against the grain.
Ah, making it the task itself.
Yeah. And actually, the students themselves got involved in rethinking the class structure. One student, Lauren McCann, suggested leaving a class session totally blank for students to pitch ideas for how to use it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It helped them realize rethinking was a useful skill they already had.
That's fantastic. So how does this apply in the workplace? How do organizations learn and rethink?
Well, think about Ellen Ochoa. First Hispanic woman in space, later took charge at NASA after the Columbia disaster.
Right, a critical time for NASA.
Definitely. And to prevent future accidents, she built a culture around constantly asking, how do you know?
Challenging assumptions about safety.
Exactly. She realized blindly following best practices can be dangerous because it stops you from questioning if those practices are still truly best or if they have flaws.
That's a really important point. Best practices can become frozen, outdated.
Like at the Gates Foundation. Apparently, Bill Gates' sheer knowledge could sometimes intimidate even top experts. They hesitated to take risks or question things.
So how did they fix that?
They focused on building psychological safety. Managers started by sharing their own past experiences of being wrong, of changing their minds, modeling the behavior.
Yeah. It gave teams the freedom and courage to speak up, take risks, experiment more, which let them tackle huge global problems more effectively.
So instead of aiming for best practices,
Maybe aim for better practices,
Well-
always improving, and adopt what's called process accountability.
meaning
Evaluating how decisions are made, the quality of the thinking process, not just judging based on the outcome alone, because good processes can sometimes lead to bad outcomes due to luck and vice versa.
like Amazon's famous 6-page memos.
Exactly. They force rigorous thinking and lay it all out before a major decision, making the thought process transparent and accountable.
And Jeff Bezos also had that disagree and commit principle, right? Encouraging leaders to take calculated risks on new ideas, even if they weren't initially convinced.
Right. It makes rethinking and experimenting feel routine, not like some huge, scary exception.
So when you combine that psychological safety, feeling safe to speak up and fail, with process accountability, evaluating the thinking, you get what?
You get a learning zone, a place where people feel free to experiment, to challenge each other constructively, all in service of getting better. It's ideal for running those experiments, especially when the stakes aren't life or death or decisions are reversible.
Okay, this has been fascinating, bringing it all back to the personal level. What does this mean for our individual lives, rethinking our own paths?
Well, it definitely means rethinking our best-laid career and life plans sometimes. Recognizing that passions, for instance, they aren't always just discovered, fully formed. Often they're developed through trying things, learning, iterating.
So don't wait for the perfect passion to strike.
Maybe not. And it also suggests scheduling a regular life checkup.
Like a health checkup.
Kind of. Once or twice a year, just pause and assess. What have I learned recently? How are my beliefs evolving? Are my goals still the right ones? Do my next steps need some rethinking?
Proactively making time for it.
Yes. The ultimate practice might just be blocking out time to rethink and unlearn, and maybe reaching out to your own challenge network, those trusted critics, and asking them, hey, what ideas or opinions do you think I should be reconsidering right now?
That takes courage, but it sounds incredibly valuable. I really think the world would be a better place if everyone put on those scientist goggles just a little more often.
Yeah.
Cultivating that humility, that doubt, that curiosity.
Absolutely. And building on that, we can't run experiments on the past. We can only imagine the what-ifs now. We can wonder, would lives have been saved if a rethinking had happened sooner in certain situations? It's a heavy thought. But the idea is, in learning cultures, whether in our own minds, our families, our workplaces, we shouldn't be weighed down by quite so many of those what-if questions later on. We can hopefully live with fewer regrets.
So the question for everyone listening is,
what assumptions are you holding on to right now that might be worth challenging? What evidence, if you saw it, would actually change your mind?
powerful questions to ponder. Thank you for your support and for listening.